Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FTX podcast. I have here with me today Tristan from Zeta Markets. Tristan and I have been friends for a while, and he's been building on the Solana ecosystem since almost the beginning. So great to have you here, Tristan.
Thanks for having me on the podcast, Tristan.
Yeah, also my namesake, so yeah, it'll get a little bit confusing here.
We definitely got introed in a few group chats, and people have mixed our names up a lot. So
yeah, we get tagged, we get cross-tagged sometimes, but it's good. I get the Zeta Alpha.
Yeah, that's right.
To kick things off, do you want to give a little introduction of yourself and what you're working on?
Yeah, sure thing. So as Tristan already introduced, I'm kind of a core contributor in building out Zeta Markets, which is a decentralized futures and options platform built on Solana. We've been building, as you mentioned, from like the very early days, and now we've scaled out, I think, a pretty formidable team and really trying to tackle, the tough things in the derivative space, which is obviously what I respect the FTX team for doing a lot of amazing work in. So yeah, doing it in DeFi, I think it's a tricky space, but definitely like a worthwhile challenge and something we're ready to tackle head on.
Yeah, and how did you get into crypto and blockchain in the first place? Like, what were you doing before?
Yeah, so I've been in it for, doesn't feel like so long, but 2017 was actually 5 years ago, which kind of blows my mind. And that was just really getting in when, a bunch of your friends start talking about crypto and, I guess you dip your toes in and trying to figure out what is this whole cryptocurrency thing. And it was mostly just like speculating on shitcoins, I guess, on, Binance and Bittrex and some of those kind of exchanges back in the day. So that was good fun. And then reading more into it, I think I got pretty hooked. Even though all the prices crashed, I was still interested in, I think, the fundamental technology and like the potential use cases. There wasn't really one in 2017, I wouldn't say, other than Bitcoin and maybe like Ethereum to an extent, but smart contracts
ICOs,
hadn't really
baby,
taken off as much as you'd hope.
ICOs.
yeah, that's right. ICOs. They were pretty crazy. That's right. There was the whole ICO boom. That was fun. But then, I kind of finished off my degree, actually did a couple of courses in distributed systems and kind of build your own proof of work, blockchain type stuff, and got really hooked on like Bitcoin, how it works and kind of the promise there. And so that was really interesting, took a bit of a breather and worked in like the tech industry for a couple of years, which was great to kind of, I think, get hands-on with the experience. And then I just wanted to do a startup for so many years, and DeFi, I think, really came around to the forefront. Probably like 1 to 2 years ago, and I saw that as being just like a killer use case for cryptos. Obviously before the NFT boom, more or less. But saw DeFi as this amazing thing. Looped in a bunch of my smart friends from finance and high frequency trading. And we're like, let's tackle something. What's the big hairy problem that we're best suited to tackle? And I think derivatives are that. They're like probably the next evolution of what we're going to see in DeFi. We've gone through kind of all the iterations of lending markets, spot markets, stuff like that. Derivatives, I think, are just huge in traditional finance, and we're just a worthwhile problem tackling. No one had really done a good job, up to that point, and I would say even now, like no one's really killed it. And so we just wanted to tackle that, and that's when I just started learning Rust, getting head on into Solana development. And this is in the early days when it was just Serum, pretty much Serum and Bonfida. Like Radium hadn't even launched, and so it was like very few docs. It was kind of challenging. Solana core team we're trying to get every dev on the phone to try and build on there. So, I got on a call with Anatoly in the very early days when he was actually like available and stuff. So that was kind of cool. And we took a bit of an infrastructure bet on just, like you guys with FTX and thinking, and supporting Solana ecosystem. We thought, hey, this is like a good long-term project. They've got a really smart team, and like, there was a lot of dev interest and just been building out ever since.
And you did this in Australia, right? Was there a lot of interest in the space already from Australia, or was it sort of hard to find friends who wanted to work on these kind of things?
Yeah, good question. I would say for DeFi in general, Australia is surprisingly quite good, which a lot of people comment, when I talk to investors or other kind of founders in the space, and they're like, hey, what is it with Aussie guys and DeFi? It's kind of nuts. And I think a lot of that probably spun out of, I think Synthetics was founded in Sydney, and then a lot of like spin-off companies from that, because that was one of like the OG DeFi protocols. And now you've got like a pretty big ecosystem, I think, coming out of Sydney and Australia in general, which is quite exciting to see. But in terms of Solana, I would like to say I think we were the first. I definitely didn't meet any other Australians in the Solana space, and there were just so few devs. I think it was mostly probably North America centric. Was where most of the people and most of the hype was. So starting out of there was definitely tough. We were just looking for a scalable L1 chain that would support kind of fast derivatives trading, and Solana seemed like the one. And yeah, it wasn't finding people with existing experience. It was just like looping in, a bunch of people who I thought were smart and that I'd known for like 5 years. And then we just started learning things from fundamentals. And here we are now, I'd like to say, we're like some of the most experienced in the space for building on Solana. So it's been a cool journey.
Yeah, it's amazing. And no, you're totally right. Australia's had a lot of DeFi output, like mostly on the Ethereum side, I think, but also Thorchain and all of those guys, them stable guys. So that is true.
That's right,
but kudos for the early Solana guys out there. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you brought this team together, like what it took to essentially start as a startup, and how you went from having the idea to getting the team to actually beginning to commercialize that.
That's a good question. And it was pretty tricky. Like I will admit, it's not like we suddenly had this idea and hey, we're funded and we've got a product and everything's working and it's all kind of like sunshine and roses. Like it was definitely like a bit of a roller coaster ride, a lot of tough points where I was almost tempted to quit, I think, just because it was like pretty challenging and like a lot of roadblocks in the way. But I think it panned out in the end. But, how it started was, just me kind of harassing my friends over like Messenger or something or other, just being like, hey, this is cool DeFi thing, sending lots of articles and like videos and stuff, trying to, upskill on all the Ethereum stuff and what people had built. And then just generally like reading a lot more into finance and understanding options, I think, at a more kind of fundamental level, given that my background's probably more in software engineering and technology than it is in finance. So that was why I was just bothering like some of my co-founders who, had been traders for a couple of years and knew this stuff back to front. So yeah, it was just really like hopping on a Zoom call every week, spitballing ideas, like what can we build? I think we started wanting to build like a fixed interest protocol because no one had done that, or like under collateralized lending. But that's a bloody hard problem, and probably hats off to the Maple guys, also Australians for trying to tackle that. But regardless, yeah, we got together. We were just throwing around ideas. We started building out. Me and my co-founder Amol started building out a little bit of a proof of concept, I guess, on Ethereum. We were just like programming Solidity and kind of learning that, understanding what a smart contract is. And that was good as like building a very simple MVP, but obviously Ethereum didn't scale as well as we would have hoped. And then it was like, we quickly ported over to Solana, started building out there. And this came at a really good time for the Solana hackathon coming around. So that was fortunate timing for us. And we pretty much all took leave from like our existing jobs. I actually quit my job because I had the conviction that, this has got to go somewhere. And so, yeah, we just took like 3 weeks to do one of the Solana global hackathons, which anyone listening out there, I think that's like the best way, hands down, to get involved in the space and like take a protocol from 0 to 1. And so we built out this simple MVP on Solana. It was like learning. We got straight into Anchor. That probably saved us like a month of time. So kudos to Amani. It's just like an awesome framework that anyone can get into the space now. I think it really lowers the barrier to entry. And we built out this really simple binary options like MVP, which is just like super simplified, idea for what our platform would eventually turn into. And we got that out there. We put in like 100 hours of work a week. It was kind of crazy. We just kind of all were holed up in the same apartment, just kind of sleeping there on the couch and then kind of working during the day. And then we ended up kind of pumping out the MVP, put it out there, did a bit of a nice presentation and, a few slides and chilled it a bit on Twitter. And then, yeah, it got enough, I think, hype from the judges. People really liked it. And we ended up winning that hackathon, which I think went really well for us. And that just gave us like a good name in the space, like, basically allowed us to kind of go and raise after that, which I think was really good as well. And then kind of go and hire lots of, really talented engineers and scale out the team to where it is now.
I can testify to that. I was on calls with these guys weekly back during that hackathon, and they were all in the same apartment, just hacking away at all hours. So, yeah,
that's right.
That was a good hackathon. I think a lot of the projects that came from that hackathon are actually now some of the established ones in the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. That's the pattern I've noticed from a lot of these hackathons. Like you look at some of the big winners in the Solana space, the guys who've done really well, and the majority of them have come through these hackathons. So let's not go like after that period, but from this period of getting the team together, doing the hackathon, and then like maybe getting the confirmations of investors afterwards. What are some of the things that you kind of wish you would have done different, or like if you were doing it over, would have been valuable to know? Yeah, sure thing. There's probably a few, like we did have some, I guess, like team issues and like, team splits and stuff, which are like honestly not great. And I won't go into like detail on them, but I think it's just like knowing your co-founders and just being like really set on who you want to work with is a super important thing. I think you got to trust them like crazy, like don't dive too headfirst into things. And I think it's easy with crypto to get kind of swept away in like the emotion and like, you see like the upside to it and you're like, hey, let's do this. And it's, kind of this very like lucrative venture. You kind of have to take a bit of a step back and almost not take things too quickly and make sure it's like sustainable. Otherwise, I think like a lot of founders, you kind of go too fast, you kind of, burn too quickly and then kind of end up blowing up. So, it depends if you want to be here for a short time or if you want to be here for a long time, which is what I would kind of suggest. And yeah, I think that's a big thing. Just kind of vet your co-founders. I know it's really hard in this kind of remote work environment to find probably like people reliably over like a Twitter or like randomly over the internet. So that's always kind of tough. I think another thing which I kind of recommend to a lot of people is try and stay focused on the goal, like really kind of flesh out, I think, your roadmap and kind of what you want to build out. Something that kind of distracted us along the way is like there are so many things happening in crypto, right? Like every week there are like 10 new protocols, 10 new exciting opportunities. There was this big NFT boom. I remember after like DJ Nates came out and like Metaplex got really hot and everyone was doing all this like candy machine stuff. And then everyone was just trying to get into NFTs. And then, it's very easy to be just like, oh, should I just be like flipping NFTs now because you can make more money, or should I be building the core protocol? And so you got to be like really ruthless and be like, I'm gonna willingly like give up my upside on some of these other kind of minor things so I can just really focus on the big goal. And I'm sure that's what like SBF and other people have had to do. There's like probably like a million opportunities, and it's just like focus on building the one product really well, on the core stuff and just doing a really good job there and not getting distracted by the millions of shiny objects that you end up coming across in crypto.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I also agree with that. And also, I should have asked at the beginning of the episode because I'm sure the listeners are going to be curious, but like, what happened to your head, Tristan?
Yeah, good question. So I was like going for a routine bike ride, I guess, that I do every Friday with like a cycling club. And yeah, I just like took a turn way too fast on like the downhill with my road bike. And yeah, pretty much like, hit the curb and then flew off my bike at 50 kilometers an hour, my head straight into a road sign. So yeah, that was pretty painful. Spent like the day in ER, got some stitches in my head. Still have a bit of a concussion that I'm pushing through.
Yeah, Dev's dead, bullish, super bullish for the project. Right. And we were actually supposed to do the podcast episode. We were supposed to do the podcast episode that morning, and I rescheduled. And Tristan sends me a photo. He's like, "I'm glad we rescheduled." It's like,
yeah, that's right. Because I'm just like bleeding out of my head, and there's just like crap all over my shirt. Yeah, it was not a great morning for me.
But going into Zeta and like the protocol itself, so kind of walk me through what Zeta Markets is now. I know it's gone through iterations, and what's the current state of it?
Yeah, sure thing. So it's definitely been like a long journey. We've been going for a year, which feels like 10 years in non-crypto time, I guess. But it's all for good reason. We've been building out what I like to consider one of the more sophisticated DeFi platforms out there. So we're really bullish on this derivative space. It's huge in traditional finance, obviously, like a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And yeah, it's just such like a ubiquitous set of products. We're really focusing right now. We started with options. We've also listed futures, and then we're probably going to look to expand to other forms of derivatives and kind of margin it and kind of consider it all under the one hood. That's kind of like the grand vision. Probably someone inspired by FTX, which has done such like an incredible job of having all these derivatives under the one house. That's really cool. We're built on Solana and obviously use Serum to power all our markets, which is really exciting and such an incredible piece of technology to have order books on chain. So we like to think of ourselves as like a little bit of an extension to Serum. Serum does like spot markets incredibly well. We've made a few little tweaks and now it works for derivatives, so options and futures trading, which is really cool. We have a few really nice innovations, which we think take derivatives from their current state where they are, where they're like a little bit illiquid, hard to trade and not super popular, to something that will hopefully be a very, very popular product in the years to come. And so that stuff like capital efficiency matters a lot to us. So being able to trade leverage and trade efficiently with the margin that you do have, that's something that's been, I think, more or less a first in DeFi, given the kind of permissionless nature of it. Everyone has been doing a lot of like fully collateralized or over collateralized trading and lending and stuff like that. And so we've set it up in a way that, you can kind of trade 10 lots of Solana exposure with maybe only like one Solana in your portfolio, which is pretty cool. And so that really makes it efficient for market participants, market makers, which obviously starts to kick off this liquidity flywheel. And once that starts going, then, we're going to hopefully have like a really liquid market. And this is something that's incredibly hard in options, because not only do you have one Solana market, you have all the strikes, all the expiries that you also have to market make. So it goes from like one market to 40 something markets that you end up having to cater to, which makes the problem space so much larger. Other than that, plenty of other improvements. We've done some pretty creative stuff, and given that our backgrounds in kind of trading and math and all that kind of stuff, we've been doing our own kind of risk engine, which I think is pretty unique and starts getting like at the pretty sophisticated DeFi use cases. So it's not just like a simple XYK swap that doesn't really do much else than that. It's like we're running this risk engine under the hood. We're doing like Black-Scholes options pricing on chain, which I think is like a pretty big achievement there. Like that stuff is pretty hard to do, and we're updating it on like a per second basis. So we're starting to tend to what you get in like a CeFi exchange with some of the experiences there and some of like the risk parameters there, but on DeFi, which I think is super cool. And then that's obviously underpinned by the Pyth Oracle, which updates every 400 milliseconds, the block time of Solana. So we can do these very responsive, reactive updates of all our parameters and prices on chain, which is really cool. So you can trade this thing. People are kind of operating and what's called turning the crank, I guess, to kind of process these events and update prices in the background. And so, this exchange is like pretty much live updating. I wouldn't call it quite high frequency yet compared to traditional finance, which is like you're working on like the millisecond, nanosecond level, but we're there updating prices more than once a second. So when we have these black swan events, we're hoping it's not like an Ethereum where suddenly like, this Oracle is updating once every 15 minutes. Everyone gets liquidated as soon as spot moves a couple of percent. That becomes a really big problem in options where things can swing, double-digit percentages in like a very short amount of time. And then I think the last main thing that we're really trying to tackle is like the UX and education problem. I think options scare a lot of people away. They're like really tricky. Like, people look at it and like, calls and puts, sure. But then once you start getting into combos, you get all these like weird payoffs. You're thinking about Greeks and all these kind of scary things that have a little bit of maths in them. And I think that scares a lot of people off. And so we want to democratize that down. We want people to invest in, these complicated strategies, but make it in a way that it's very approachable. As I say to a lot of people, I think options are kind of like the Swiss Army knife of derivatives and trading instruments. Like you can really do a lot with them. You can kind of pair them up in any sort of way and get really the most customized, personalized exposure that you want. And if we can kind of bring that down, that barrier to entry, we can create the kind of combos and products for people to trade. I think that's going to be awesome. Allow people to trade like the professionals without having to be like a gigabrain to get in there.
Yeah, I think that's really cool what you've developed so far. And also just that goal is commendable because it's like where we have to go in general for the space to keep growing. For the listeners, Pyth is a oracle. It's a data oracle on Solana and across other chains. And essentially what they were saying is it spits them a price into their Black-Scholes model, and that allows them to compute the pricing that they put on their options, which isn't something that many people are doing in DeFi right now. And I really like that aspect of like the Pyth combo with DeFi, right? Because it allows you a lot more multivariability and not have to wait for such long periods of time. I want to go back to one of the things you were talking about earlier, Tristan, which was Serum as this core primitive. How does that work? So how do you grab an order book that's on chain and then convert that into a way that works for derivatives?
Yeah, sure thing. So it's a little bit different, man. Candidly, we haven't upgraded to the asset agnostic order book Serum before yet, but they're definitely planning to do that. Yeah, currently it's like derivatives contracts are a little bit different. You're kind of not trading the actual kind of coin pair itself. You're trading the kind of derivative, I guess, on the coin pair. So we do have to, we've kind of modified Serum a little bit. So it trades like these dummy tokens in a sense under the hood, but it's still essentially using the matching engine, which is, what the asset agnostic order book is really meant to do at the end of the day. And so some of the stuff is a little bit different, but in principle, you are just trading two SPL tokens, whatever they represent. It doesn't matter if it's an actual SPL coin or whether it's a derivative contract of that SPL coin. It's kind of like the same principle. So that's what I love about Serum, is it kind of like really scales to all matter of use cases with the matching engine.
Makes sense. And then these tokens, like one of these tokens could be an options contract essentially. and you trade it versus
Yep.
Sol, or okay. And then you can redeem
that's right.
you can redeem the token for its underlying or something.
Yeah, pretty much. So we do what's called European options, and they're also like cash settled. So basically, we line it up with Deribit expiries. Deribit being like kind of the premier CeFi exchange for options. And so every Friday morning, 8 a.m. UTC, that's when expiries happen. So you have these kind of weekly expiries, which is what we support now. And so that's when your options expire, and we kind of permissionlessly settle them. We have this like crank, so people can kind of call this instruction, and it goes through like the big log of all the options that need to get expired and cashed out. And excuse me, it goes through and it basically just settles. You basically take the difference between the spot price from PIF at settlement and the strike price of whatever option. So say Sol is like 120 and you had the strike price is like 100, you kind of $20 in the money, and then you can kind of use that to get your payout and your kind of P&L from that option. We just do a bit of a internal accounting, shift around all the balances, move around the money to the winners and losers, and that's what you end up getting at settlement.
Super cool. And another thing you touched on that I thought was interesting is this whole objective of having one app through which people can trade many types of derivatives, which I'm sure also ties into the portfolio margining. So you can use the same collateral across all of the derivatives. What are some of these other derivative products you're excited for, or things that you guys are looking at building?
Yeah, gotcha. So there's really, I think, a pretty wide scope. I think we've like started tackling these fundamental building blocks that everything can kind of be built off. So yeah, futures are really nice because they provide this like linear product. You can think of them almost as like an option with like a delta of one. So if your spot price moves one, obviously so does your futures price. Options are a little bit different, where it's like you can have like delta less than one typically. So it's like 0.5, like your Sol price could go up $1 and then your option price only goes up $0.50. And so it's nice because now you've got a linear product and you've got a non-linear product, and you can start like adding and subtracting them in all these kind of different ways to get these I think pretty complicated payoffs, and pretty much build any exposure that you want out of those two building blocks. So that's what we support now. The only slightly annoying thing with futures and options is they are expiring. And so it is kind of this slight UX headache where people have to go and roll them. And we do like a weekly expiry kind of schedule. So every week, you put on your positions, they expire, you have to put on your positions. Something that we're seeing is obviously very popular, like the rise of perps, I think, in a lot of these CeFi markets, as well as on platforms like DYDX. And I know like Mango and some others are also doing it on Solana. So that's kind of really exciting to see. And, I can definitely see people want this kind of exposure that kind of rolls over time. You don't have to worry about, putting on your positions again. So we definitely want to, potentially venture into the perp space, like list that under the same collateral framework, or integrate another protocol into that would be really cool. And maybe a team like MarginFi or something or other. It's like a really nice way to look into this cross protocol margining problem. Other than that, there's stuff like I know people have been trying to tackle everlasting options, which are almost like the perp equivalent for options. I don't think anyone's done that successfully yet. So yeah, that might be a tricky one, maybe on the longer term roadmap. My reasoning was like, hey, let's sort out the margin framework for these kind of expiring options, and then we can probably move into the perpetual stuff a little bit later once we're comfortable with that. And then I know like 0.1 and some of these other protocols open are doing these power perpetuals, which also get you nonlinear exposure, but have like a bunch of nice kind of benefits there in terms of you can't get liquidated. You can kind of have, I think, somewhat similar kind of exposure to an option where you have like this gamma, like non-linearity in your kind of payoff, but you don't have to expire them either. They're like a perpetual contract. They just kind of run forever. And then, yeah, there's just like a whole host other than that. So that's what we do in our kind of DEX products. We're also seeing this huge boom in what's called structured products, which are super exciting. So Riven was kind of the first mover for that in the Ethereum space. We helped them port over to Solana, which was really exciting. And I would say probably the biggest, one of the biggest at least, Ethereum projects to move over to Solana. Katana's out there, Friction, and a bunch of others kind of bundling up, I think, and making it a lot easier for the average user out there to come and trade any kind of derivative stuff. You give them a nice product which kind of bundles it up. You can go and get this like customized exposure, which is really cool. And so that's becoming like a big market segment that we're also trying to tap into. And so we're building this kind of architecture, I think, for a lot of these vaults and structured products called Flex, and that kind of underpins at the moment. Katana and Ribbon does like 35 mil TVL now, which is super exciting. And so that's like another nice kind of more OTC focused product. So we're really trying to, cover the whole scope of derivatives. We've got the serum-based DEX product, which is going to give you the best prices. It's going to update, the most frequently. That's where we should have like the lion's share of liquidity. And that's where I think most of the trading will go on. And then if you're trying to look for this more chunky kind of flow, the stuff that kind of big market makers will potentially be taking down, and, especially catering to these vaults and bespoke products, that's when you're looking at Flex, which is like the more OTC product. So we're really trying to capture both markets there.
Yeah, I mean, the layers of composability here just get deeper and deeper, which I think is awesome. So could you actually explain the layers for like a Flex vault, for example?
Yeah, sure thing. So on the very like lowest level, we have this Flex protocol, essentially Flex being like Flex options, as they're called in kind of in the US, I believe. So they're basically, whereas if you look at the Serum exchange, it's like standardized strikes, like you got the 90, 100, 110, 120 or something or other. And we kind of, the contract we have predetermines that based on the fifth oracle start of every week, and kind of lays out these strikes. And it's also like weekly, there are bit expiries, like I mentioned. Flex is totally different. It's basically like choose your own parameters. You go in there, you kind of send an instruction to the smart contract, like, hey, I want, this crazy strike. If someone wants to put out some DJ Vault, they do like whatever, your 69 strike or something or other, and, they have fun with that. Or you can set like a very long expiry option. So something we actually wanted to do was put out a market for this Doquan bet that, Luna would be at a certain price or whatever in a year. So we're like, oh, this is basically just a prediction market, like binary option type thing. We can kind of put out like probably like a simple vault for that, which we're doing really cool. We didn't get around to it, but maybe the next one. So you can like fully customize this thing. We do like a 1 year time to expiry kind of vault there. Yeah, essentially we have this protocol. You can select the strike, expiry, and whatever other parameters, how it's settled, etc. And so these kind of vault providers, I guess, come in here. So your Ribbon and your Katana, say, come in, they use that, they build the kind of vault infrastructure around that, which is like, how do people deposit and withdraw funds and kind of roll it across time? They kind of manage a lot of that, and they will call our protocol under the hood using what's called cross-program invocations on Solana. So it's like one contract calling another contract. And so that's kind of how that works. And there's obviously like a front-end component to that, and people can kind of deposit into the vault. And so it all gels like super nicely. And now you're getting not only, our protocol layer plus the kind of vault application layer is starting to get all these cool integrations. We actually just integrated Solend super recently, like kind of a week ago. And so all their C token stuff, which is like yield bearing tokens, we can now do vaults on that. So not only do you, the kind of problem was you deposit a bunch of money into this vault, right? It just kind of sits there for a week. You kind of sell the option on it, but then it's like your USDC, say for like a put sell or something or other, it's kind of not doing anything. And so now we kind of use the C token for USDC instead. So it actually like owns yield from, borrow lending in the background. And so you actually, get a few more % on your kind of vault there. So it's just like slightly nicer yields. And that's why I'm pretty bullish on, I think, this whole DeFi thing, because we can start integrating all these protocols together in really synergistic ways. And I think come out of it with the best product and the best payoffs for users.
What are some of the challenges that you're seeing for derivatives and DeFi to take off and get some of this liquidity and volume that you see in centralized finance?
Yeah, I think great question. And this is probably like the biggest thing front and center for us. I think one thing is probably liquidity that kind of underpins everything. Like no one wants to trade in like in the liquid market. And, this is more true than ever for like options. If you probably use some like competitive platforms, and even us sometimes on like the very off days, it is like, you are missing like some market quotes on certain strikes. And then, if you want to enter and exit positions, it becomes a bit tough. Whereas if you go into like an FTX, into like any kind of perp market, you just got like almost infinite liquidity there. It's just like very easy to trade in and out of. So that's where we're trying to get to. There are like a few things to get there. So it's obviously ramping up more market makers. I think it's also making the platform a little bit more capital efficient, I think is what everyone's trying to do. And having all this cross margining is pretty important there. That's something we're working towards and making like really good strides towards. And I think it's getting a lot better. And that's the feedback we've gotten. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's like an education thing. I think people still kind of familiar with just spot markets and kind of simplified, especially on DeFi. I think DeFi is really catered to just yield farming, right? It's just like put my money in this thing, has an APY number, APY number goes up, I make money. But not that many people are out there like actively trading and market making on like a Serum order book, right? That takes like a certain level of sophistication, and you probably have to set up a bit of like algo trading or think about things a little bit harder. And there is definitely some challenges there. So trying to educate people a bit more, get people more comfortable with trading these kind of products is important. And then it's like a UX thing. I think it's like some of the crypto UX is like a little bit clunky, like compared to say using like a centralized exchange where it has like really nicely documented APIs. The front ends are like pretty good. Things are responsive and work. When you're like moving on a blockchain, sometimes like transactions fail or like this and that happen, or I wouldn't say we've nailed the design bit generally in DeFi yet. I think we've tried to take a very good stab at that and make our UX really good and super killer. And we've had a ton of feedback that people love trading on our platform because it's just like nice, both nicely engineered and nicely designed, where it's I think just like pleasurable to trade on. We also have like a mobile app, which I think is like pretty new, I think, to most DeFi protocols out there. Most people just tend to focus on web, but I think given the success of Robinhood and other such platforms, that's going to become a big market where people can kind of just trade on mobile pretty simplistically. So yeah, I think those are two big ones on the top of my head.
Yeah, and that second one touched on what my next question is, which is essentially like, I totally agree that the first step of DeFi really taking off or how it has taken off has been a lot of institutions or larger players participating. How do you get past that? Like, how do you get it to the place where you can have kind of the average person come in and do some trades and feel comfortable?
That's a good question. So, yeah, I think right now, especially for derivatives, it does cater to a lot of like the institutional audience, which, some have moved over, but I think there's still kind of blockers to getting there. I think that's namely like, things like custody, I think are still not super live on Solana, as well as like a few other kind of potential blockers. And for them to move like, huge amounts of capital on there, like, especially given some of the like recent events of like, hacks of certain protocols, I think people are a little bit scared or like tentative to move over huge amounts of money and start trading that. Yep. So yeah, I think it's like a security thing, people to get more comfortable for like custody solutions to come up where I think people can be comfortable like having a lot of money on DeFi, even though I think DeFi eventually will become like the safest place to hold your money. Like if you have all these open source contracts that are like fully audited and you kind of control your own private keys and stuff, that just makes sense to me. But we're kind of getting there, I guess, and we'll be there pretty soon. For like the retail user, I think it's still like I talk to a lot of my friends and like people who are not, I think, super embedded in the crypto space. There are still these kind of onboarding blockers or kind of hurdles that kind of it kind of narrows the funnel, right? The people who are in DeFi are like people like me and you who've kind of gone through the pain of setting up, a wallet, buying cryptocurrency, kind of sending it around, managing private keys, doing all these kind of things. And it takes, I think, someone who's like a generally somewhat sophisticated user to kind of go through and do that, as well as, connect your wallet up to the exchange and kind of, trade around on that. And that's maybe not for like the average person. But then, yeah, I think it's like the on-ramps, getting your money in there and managing kind of wallet infrastructure and stuff like that. That's probably like a bit new to people. People aren't kind of super familiar, and admittedly, probably if you're holding crypto, a lot of people are still kind of holding the Bitcoins and Ethereums, and less so people kind of familiar with Solana. Although now that it's a top 5 coin, I'm pretty sure that will change shortly. I'm still pretty bullish, I think, on stuff like NFTs being like the great gateway for a lot of DeFi applications and other more sophisticated apps. I think that caters to kind of the general audience a lot more than DeFi. Like I might have one of my friends who comes in there and they don't necessarily know anything about options trading, and like that's not something that would catch their eye or something that they would want to get into straight away. But if you're doing collectible JPEG NFTs, that's like a very easy thing to understand. People can kind of swap their crypto very quickly and go onto like a Magic Eden or like an OpenSea and start buying these. And then I think that's kind of like a good onboarding journey in that they've kind of traded these like digital kind of NFTs and other kind of forms of tokens. They get very familiar with that, and then probably start, they might have made a lot of money from that. They want to start putting that in like a yield farm or using other kind of, DeFi and finance applications. And that's when you'll see, I think, more people kind of bridging over. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for those kind of NFT gaming use cases that will get us that like, huge user adoption.
Hmm. What do you think about the multi-chain world? Or I guess, how does Zeta think about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's super interesting, and I tend to agree with a lot of people where that it's not going to be one chain to rule them all necessarily. I'm definitely seeing Solana becoming probably that finance DeFi chain just because it's so fast. It just makes a lot of sense. You've already got order book infrastructure. I would say most of like the very interesting primitives have already been built out on Solana. So that's where I kind of see that fitting. Probably also like gaming use cases and other stuff like that need to be fairly high frequency. That kind of makes a lot of sense to me. And I do imagine like a lot of people will be like bridging assets over and kind of trading it through Solana to get access to some of these really good applications. And the bridging infrastructure is definitely getting a lot better. I was kind of doing some the other week, and I was, it was pretty painless, I think, and easy to use. So definitely pretty bullish on that. And then you've got other ecosystems, I think, that are pretty big on a lot of this like multi-chain stuff. So yeah, definitely pretty interested in that. I think the thing with Solana is like, yeah, we have maybe like 10, 11, maybe more billion in TVL. Ethereum is still at like 100 and something. So I think there's this like big pie of TVL that's still available to us that can kind of bridge over and be used there. I think as like bridges get better, more liquidity starts flowing, I think very like seamlessly between chains. That would be really cool. And then there's other stuff like on the development side of things. A lot of people have asked us like, hey, are you going to build your platform Zeta on Ethereum, or are you going to build it on like ABAX or one of these other chains? And to be honest, I've had to say no to a lot of people because we already spent so much time building on Solana, and because our architecture I think is like pretty sophisticated. It's not saying that I can just click a few buttons and port it over to EVM code. And you're using stuff like a Serum order book that just simply does not exist on other chains. So I think that's a bit of a tough proposition, but there's stuff like Neon Labs are building this kind of EVM to Solana kind of compiler, which is pretty cool. So I think that will encourage a lot of EVM protocols to move over to Solana, which is maybe kind of like what ends up tipping the scales towards Solana's favor. If you're able to do everything that you can do on Ethereum on Solana, I think that would be really cool. And likewise, if someone figures a way to port it back the other way, which I think is harder given Solana is like a more performant chain, that would be really cool. But yeah, we're just kind of like monitoring, seeing how the situation goes. I think we'll probably end up doing some cross-chain deposit functionality, which would be cool. Like you're on Ethereum, you come to our website, you don't have to have a Phantom wallet necessarily or Solana, but you just kind of click a few buttons in MetaMask that just like route it through probably like a Wormhole or Bridge, and then like a Jupiter to kind of like swap your tokens, and then suddenly like you can deposit kind of SPL tokens into our exchange and trade that. I think that would be super clean.
Yeah, that's super cool. I thought that was funny what you said about like, you can't really take these code bases from Solana to Ethereum. And I wanted to ask, is it true that's because like with less constraints, devs become quote unquote lazier in the sense that like if you have more resources to build with, you'll try and use as much of those as you can. And so it's harder to be regressive.
I think that's pretty true to an extent. Like we've definitely like maxed out the Solana compute limits with like everything, just trying to like micro optimize it. So yeah, I don't think there's like too much room to budge. And yeah, I think just generally some of the parameters of like, we kind of expect our exchange to be updated or like have updated prices every few seconds. And that's kind of the model that we built around. If you go back to like a chain, like an L1 Ethereum or something or other, I think we'll be a bit better. I haven't like dug in quite enough. But yeah, it was just like, we were kind of worried about, there's no like order book infrastructure, there's no high frequency Oracle. Like these are all the ingredients that we need to make Zeta work.
Yep, makes sense. And a couple last questions for you. So one is, if you had some advice for people who want to come in and build in the space, maybe start a team, it could be one or two pieces that stand out to you.
Yeah, good question. I'd say first piece of advice, probably just take the leap of faith, or at least just get hands-on with things. I think it's very easy to be like, hey, crypto is really cool, I'm gonna like dabble a bit, but not really go headfirst into it. And so people kind of sit on the sidelines for a long time and then get really FOMO when like everyone who's taken the plunge is just like done incredibly well. So I would say like definitely go for it. There is a big exodus, I think, from like traditional tech and finance companies and elsewhere to like crypto, and it's like for good reasons, like a lot of smart people getting into the space. So I think that's like a good thing to capitalize on, is find other smart people. I think the ideal candidate that we've been kind of looking for is someone who I think is in one of these industries is super smart, and they kind of just dabble in crypto a lot, kind of on the side. They spend like their nights and stuff, going and trading and using DeFi apps. That was me for like the longest time, where I was still kind of working my own job, but I was kind of mucking around with like all these Solana dApps, in my spare time, getting an understanding of what it was and kind of writing a bit of code in my free hours. So I think, yeah, just kind of go for it, start building out some stuff, or at least start like fleshing out like a white paper or some ideas, try and loop in, I think some people you trust and that you think are going to be, good co-founders. Getting into a startup is kind of like a marriage. So you got to know them pretty well, I think, and trust that they're going to have your back. And then, yeah, other than that, I think getting into one of these hackathons or just meeting other people in the community is super important. I think like the network kind of goes a long way. Like I came into this knowing maybe like one or two people in the crypto space and like not having any kind of network. And it was tough for me because I was just like, don't really know too much what's going on or how to kind of like further myself or kind of, I think get more involved in the space or like get more opportunities coming my way. But going through these hackathons, like you meet a ton of other people who are like-minded and kind of want to get into the space. There are also a bunch of these like physical hacker houses. We actually helped run one in Singapore recently, which is a lot of fun. So, if you're in any of those locations, definitely rock up and you'll meet like literally hundreds of people who are also like crazy about this thing and potentially like really good co-founders to work with. Then yeah, other than that, I think just like reach out to a bunch of people. Like Twitter's a great place to just like meet people randomly. You can just like DM people. I think like for the most part, like people kind of try and reply to DMs and be pretty nice about things. And if you can get on a call with them or meet them or like have a bit of a chat, like you might learn a ton of stuff. And random opportunities just come on your plate when you just chat to someone. They're like, hey, would you like to do this or that? Or I remember like DMing some people and then they're like, hey, come on a podcast, or probably just like a lot of people that you meet are just like these kind of chance occurrences, and people kind of refer you to other people. And then, before you know it, in a couple of months, you go from knowing like one or two people in the space to like, say 100 or something or other. And then you have like a really good group of friends and a network to kind of get started in crypto. So I think that's like goes kind of a long way.
My last question, Tristan, is what is a habit or a lesson that you've learned that allows you to live a better life, makes you happier or more productive?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think focusing on the long term and realizing, especially if you're a founder, that it's going to be a roller coaster ride. Like some weeks I feel on top of the world where it's like, you go through a raise or you get like a ton of record volume on the platform, or Solana's just hit like $200 or something, and you're feeling absolutely thrilled. But then some weeks you're in the pits, like things aren't going your way, or just generally you're like a little bit burnt out. So I think gearing yourself towards the long term and like not beating yourself up like week over week if things aren't going your way, because things I think over time will turn for the better. And then when things are going really well as well, like know that it probably won't last, and things will be shit. Sometimes they'll be good. And then I think even though we did, like I pretty much worked for like a year without taking a day off, which I probably wouldn't recommend to a lot of people. Like you do have to kind of live and breathe your startup, and everything's kind of on your shoulders. But at the same time, like I think take care of yourself somewhat. I obviously haven't with this these stitches in my head, but I think like look after yourself, like work hard, but also like everyone likes to say, hey, the culture, and I think like a lot of like finance bros and tech bros, like, I don't sleep, I just stay up all night and I like code and that kind of stuff. But I think like getting your 6 to 8 hours of sleep, getting in like exercise every day or a couple of days is pretty good to like sustain yourself long term. So yeah, I think that's probably the way to go, and like try not to ditch your normal like day-to-day relationships as well. Like everything in favor of the startup. You gotta find that work-life balance, and maybe at the first couple of months I would say just kind of like slum it out and just kind of you've seen that Twitter post I put out where I was just like sleeping on a yoga mat for time when I moved into my new place. So you can do that for a bit, and then like over a period of time, like probably like back away from that and try and be a bit more sustainable. And I think that will like benefit you in the long term, because like this crypto industry is going to get built over like years, if not like decades. And I'm sure people kind of like make it in the short term, but you want to maximize probably your expected probability of success over like the long term as well.
Yeah, no, I can totally confirm. I think the first year and a half at FTX, I didn't take a single day off outside of like Sundays,
Yep.
which probably helped me
Yeah,
grow a lot
exactly.
in the company. Got to grind it out in crypto.
That's right. That's right. I only started taking Sundays off, so it's been a welcome change.
Yeah, that's always so nice. Well, Tristan, thanks for coming on the episode.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.